Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. My name is Nell Thompson. I'm the Secretary of the Australian Institute of Animal Management and I'll be hosting the webinar for you today. I've been on the AIM committee since 2013 and I'm also the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program. The Australian Institute of Animal Management, or as we call it AIM, is the national peak body representing local government animal management officers. The AIM board consists of a wide range of professionals engaged in the various aspects of animal management. AIM seeks to support those engaged in the business of animal management and the function itself by providing training and information, opportunities for networking and collaboration, and by encouraging the use of best practice policy and practices. AIM understands the significant pressures placed on local government and related sector service providers when working in the companion animal management space. We welcome new members and people can join via our website at www.aim.org.au. So to our presentation for today, there will be around 50 minutes of presentation and around 10 to 15 minutes of question time once the presentation has concluded. The recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to all members to watch at any time. We're going to ask that everyone mutes themselves during the presentation, and if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. If you have quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, put your hand up. There's a button at the bottom of your screen that where you can put your hand up, and we're happy to answer those questions during the session. And if you have more questions or we don't get to yours during the question time, you can send a message to our Facebook page and we'll get to it that way. I'm pleased to welcome back Dr. Jessica Moore-Jones as our presenter today. Jess is a bit of a favourite and we had a fantastic response to Jessica's last session with calls for more content in that vein, and so we were happy to oblige. Jess is a veterinarian, a business owner, a leader, a consultant and a coach in what she calls the people part of the animal industry. Having managed major animal organisations such as including Senior Advisor to Auckland Council Animal Management, Executive Manager RSPCA WA, CEO RSPCA Darwin, and Manager of Wildlife Health at Taronga Zoo, Jess now manages Unleashed Coaching and Consulting. Here she works with vet clinics, local governments and animal shelters to develop and empower their teams, their leaders and their community outcomes. So let's get started. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Nell, and thank you so much for inviting me back. It's a pleasure to be involved. I'm pretty passionate about this area, so people taking an interest and wanting to know more is right up my alley and is the reason I get out of bed in the morning. So really nice to be able to talk to a few of you all at the same time. So this session is about positive workplaces. Now, the reason that I do a fair bit of work in this space is because the reality is we work with animal people, and animal people are wonderful, wonderful, caring, beautiful human beings who sometimes have some stereotypical tendencies towards not being people. And as a stereotype, that can mean that as an organization, we have a lot of staff who aren't naturally attuned to bringing together people and having really constructive interpersonal skills, which means that we can, if not paying attention, end up with cultures that are a little bit swaying towards negative. Now, add to that the insane emotional toll of some of the things that we do, the incredible client and customer and community pressures that we have on us, and it's kind of no wonder that we have a tendency towards cultures that could be more positive. So I work in this space exclusively with the animal industry because that's where I'm from, it's what I'm passionate about, and it's what I really believe we can make a huge impact on. And I want to talk today about creating thriving cultures in the animal management or animal sheltering space. All right, so how are we going to do that? Couple of things, because we've only got a short amount of time, and this is something I run over a 6-month course sometimes. But in the space of an hour, we're going to touch very quickly on what and why. I'm going to assume if you're here, you kind of know the basics of culture, but we'll just get everybody onto the same page, clear up some myths and misnomers. Then we're going to talk about what it means to design a culture and do it on purpose rather than just let it happen to itself. Then we're going to get into the meaty stuff, is which things work. Which things should you absolutely throw your time and energy and probably money at to make sure that you have them right, and will scientifically over, but also from anecdotal experience transforming cultures, they make the impact that you want them to make. Which things on the flip side of that are the shiny distractions, the sound great and look good on paper, or when Google does it, or when your staff come and ask you for it, it seems like, I can see why that make a difference, but actually haven't been shown in the data on big global Fortune 500 company scale to work, and or where I have found in my personal experience of now sort of transforming my own cultures in a workplace 5 or 6 times, but also working with other businesses, that the energy and effort and money required to do them make them a little bit further down your list of priorities of what you want to do. But then the biggest part is the other stuff. Not obviously, yes, chuck your money at this, and obviously, probably don't bother chucking your money at this. But the stuff that, if done well, makes a huge impact on a thriving culture. And if done poorly, you're probably better off not doing it at all. And that is where all of the nuance of culture comes in, is that so many leaders, so many of you, so many people I work with put so much time and energy and genuine care into trying to create a wonderful place to work for their people. And so much of it ends up falling a bit flat and or making things worse. And it's so discouraging. It's so deflating. I've been there. I've done that. I've poured my heart and soul into trying to make things better. And people just are like, oh, this is awful, or worse, they blame me for it being awful. And so this is about kind of trying to give you some tips and tricks that if these are the things that you can and want to invest in, if these are the things your staff are asking for, here's how to do them in a way that sets them up for success. And here's how to do them in a way that I would love if you would avoid, because actually you're better off not pouring your time and energy at them unless you're going to do them in the meaningful way. Fair? Cool. All right, so who am I? What have I got? Nell already introduced me. You don't really need to know much of that stuff. Suffice to say, I've been there in the trenches. I am at the stage in my career where probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I started getting headhunted specifically for cultures that needed transforming, which means that I tend to land in a new role, either in a consultancy space or in a, doing, for an example, I recently took an interim GM space for a major vet clinic because they had toxicity that they needed help with. And that means that I see the worst of the worst. And I also see what it's like to pour your heart and soul into something and people think that you're not trying, or people think that you don't care. And I think that that's something that's really important to recognize as leaders in our industry, in any industry, that the toll of doing this, of caring, is huge, which is why I'm so passionate about setting up for people for success to try to actually have the impact that they're trying to make, rather than just sort of fumbling their way through as best they can with the real world and real people, where the academia and the things that the textbooks say should work and that awesome webinar that you listen to, awesome ideas, but then you try to put them in place and you've got human beings with emotion and it just doesn't go how you thought it was. So the main thing to know about where I've been and what I've done is I've been where you are. I've been in the trenches, and I know that some days are hard and it sucks, but that's why I want to help. So getting straight into it, culture. the simplest, broadest scale of definition, some people would call it the vibe. The kind of most common one is how we do things around here. If I was to take a new staff member who is, starting on their first morning, and I was to put them alone in a room with a bunch of your staff and then walk out again, what would they take away from that? How would they feel about this workplace and what happens here and how they should behave around here? Because people behave how the people around them behave. So it's all about understanding, how does it work here? What are the unwritten rules of the workplace? Because there are written rules everywhere. There is policy about what our culture should be, and there's all of these signs on the wall about what behaviors we should be showing. But the culture in our workplace is not those words on the wall. It's not the policies written down. It's how people actually do behave. And it has a tendency to not be so much about how leadership behaves, but how the bulk of the people, which tends to be, the people on the ground in the thick of things, how they behave. Now, leadership has a huge impact on it, of course. How you behave is in a fishbowl and is magnified 1 billion times. But actually how we do things around here tends to be how people like me. So if you're hiring somebody at entry level, they're going to look at people at entry level. So the one thing that I want to be really clear, because it's a little bit of a misconception about culture, is that there's this difference between there's a good culture and a bad culture. Now, yes, there are some really clearly, obviously cultural things that aren't great. People being mean to each other, bullying, gossiping, that kind of negativity spiral that we can get in a culture. And so there's such a thing as a positive culture, a thriving, flourishing culture. And there's one that's flailing, that's negative, that's, if we go to the extreme, it's pretty toxic. But outside of the good versus bad, there is no such thing as the right culture. There's no such thing as the culture that everyone should have, because it absolutely and 100% depends on your organization. And so the difference between a culture that you might have in a tech company where everybody wears hoodies and just, head down, bum up, you don't have to speak to us because, 3/4 of us are, too busy and too important for this, might work for that tech company. Whereas the culture in a nursing retirement home or hospice care, where it should be warm, quiet and personable and about personal relationships above all else. Now, both of those work for those industries and for the organization. Similarly, if we're talking about, in our industry, working out where we want to sit on a line between a fun culture and a serious culture matters. Because if we're a local government organization and we have a serious regulatory job to do, but we want fun in the workplace, we actually have to decide how we want to balance that. Because if we've got people swinging all the way to one side and we've done so much work on them being fun and having a carefree time, that could get out of hand. And at the other end of the scale, we want them to be really clear and really, professional and really succinct. And this is how it works here in a regulatory environment. But then there's no space for warmness, no space for interpersonal skills and that sort of stuff. So the point in all of that is to say that there is no such thing as a good or a bad culture. It's about designing what you want on purpose. It's about not letting it just happen. It's about kind of going, all right, well, where do we want to sit in all of these things? Do we want to be a trusting environment where we believe people can do what they want to do because we trust them to do the right thing? Or do we want to be a controlled environment because they have to tick these boxes and this is the framework we have to work within? Where on that line do most of us sit? Because, the extremes are usually where we want to avoid. So that is misnomer number one I want to clear up. Culture by design is my fancy way of saying, if you let it happen by accident, as a general rule, it will spiral downwards. Okay, culture is designed mostly by the people living the day-to-day. And if the people living the day-to-day are having negative experiences on the whole, then it's going to spiral down. And unfortunately, the science is pretty clear that on average, we feel a negative experience more than twice as strongly as we do for a positive experience. So we need at least twice as many. Apparently, there is a magic number of 3.1. 3.1 as many times good things as negative things happen in a workplace in order for the culture just to stay neutral. In order for people's happiness or engagement levels to stay neutral, it's a 3.1 to 1 ratio. And that's pretty terrifying, because in our industry, we know that there are some negative things that do happen, have to happen, and we can't control. And so how we find the positive things to make sure the trajectory goes upwards is actually really challenging until we realize how simple some of these positive things are. So don't get too stressed just yet. But here is the overarching, this is the program that I work within. If you're going to do culture, you've got 4 pillars that you want to make sure that you have sorted and down in order for things to start being done on purpose. So you want to look at safety. Okay, that means physical, but also very heavily psychological safety. And I'm sure you've all heard that watchword around now that gets thrown around a bit. Alignment. So do people align to what you're doing? Are the people who work for you in the right job for them? That's really important. They need to feel valued, okay, and they need to feel empowered. And that looks like making sure they've got all of the tools to do the job properly. That makes sure they feel like they have a control over their own destiny and the job that they're doing, and being able to do a good job and knowing what they think a good job is and being listened to. But also it means a sense of progression, a sense of moving forward. For most people, this one is a caveat that some people actually really like just turning up, depending on what stage of their life they're at, but most people need a professional pathway forward. So that is a pillar of the things that if we're doing those things, that's your foundations of a good culture, okay? Now, we call these other things underneath them levers. Levers, they use that term. It's a little bit on that kind of HR speak wank, but really it's about, you can turn these up, turn them down in order to achieve the things that you want, okay? So we pull on these levers in order to increase safety, alignment, value, and empowerment. All right, so behavior tolerance, how much you let people get away with poor behaviors, and emotional intelligence, people's ability to understand their own emotions and that of others. Okay, alignment. So how much do they know what's going on? How much do you communicate in multiple directions? And are they aligned with what you do? Okay, because we all know that there are people who take jobs in animal organizations because they want to work with animals without really understanding what it is to do our job. And we need to do a better job, for most of us, of making sure before they hit an interview room, are they aligned with our values and our mission and our vision? And then reinforce that multiple times over as they onboard with us, so that if they're going to not align, they do it early. And then also that as we keep growing and evolving, them as a person and us as an organization, that we keep checking back in about that and reinforcing that. Value, we want to make sure they have a personal connection with each other, but importantly with their manager. Okay, do they feel like a human being and not a number? And then reward and recognition. We'll go into that in a fair bit of detail shortly. And then to be empowered, have they got a pathway to move forward? Do they think that you genuinely care about them moving forward as an individual? And do they get a say in what happens and why and how? So that's the kind of levers that we pull one way or the other, because there's no such thing as not communicating, right? There's no such thing as not doing it, because not sending any team emails and never seeing your staff, that is communicating. Okay, you are communicating something by doing that. And there's no such thing as emotional intelligence not existing. It's just where it sits on the spectrum. Okay, so that's all the definitions. That's all the academic speak. We're going to chuck right now into, all right, but what do we do? What do we not do? What can we do? What should we do? What should we spend our money on? So first up, what do I not necessarily recommend you spending your money on? Okay, the shiny distractions. These are the things that you see in, movies or in the media where they talk about great cultures, at Google, where they've got slides in the lobby, where they've got foosball tables in the office, where people are allowed to have a nap in the middle of the day, where they've got free, donuts every morning for breakfast. That stuff doesn't actually work. Okay, it looks good and Google chucks money at it for a reason, and I'll talk about that in a second, but actually it's not where I would spend my money. Okay, Google does have a reputation as a pretty positive culture, but it's actually not to do with these. These are shiny, look at me, look at my culture, consider us to get people in the door, to get noticed, to get attention, to get publicity. And then the things that actually make them have a good culture is that people are allowed to spend 20% of their time working on a project of their choosing, that they genuinely allow all people at all levels to be innovating in a genuine way to try to create the new next big thing. They have really strong focus on foundational tenets of innovation. So the people who work there are aligned with what they stand for, and they come in, they're allowed to do their job however they want to do their job, as long as it gets done. So Google does have great workplaces, but all of those fancy, cool things you read about in articles are not the cause of it. They are the look at me, come and look at us marketing strategy. So ignore all that, all right? If you want to put a foosball table in your office, go for it, but don't think that it's going to undo foundations of a toxic culture. Same with perks, okay? Perks are things like, you know, memberships to gyms or, you know, free cupcakes on a Friday or, you know, discounted optometry. In America, some of that stuff is actually necessary. That's barely even a perk. It's just part of what we have to do in order to get people, you know, you have to give insurance and dental. But us here in the safe, wonderful world of employment law in Australia, all of those perks are nice. But if you consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most of us know, if people aren't feeling psychologically safe, having a gym membership, a little bit pointless. Okay. So yes, if you've got money to splash around, sure, some of that stuff's a really nice cherry on top. But foundationally, if I was going to spend my money and effort somewhere, I just leave all the perks out. You know, the big corporates use them in vet clinics for sort of splashing around. How great are we? But they don't have the foundations of a good culture, so I still wouldn't work for them. And most people make that choice one way or the other about what's important to them because it's what aligns for them, right? Other shiny distractions, workshops about culture. Now, this is borderline ironic because I run workshops about culture, but the thing that's really important to me is that I won't run a workshop about culture for you if it's not part of doing the foundations, doing the work, being part of a program, being part of a plan and a strategy to genuinely nurture or transform our culture. Because if I come in there and I do a 3-hour session on, yeah, this is how we're going to treat each other, and this is the behavior that we believe in, and these are our values, and this is the mission that we all buy into, it's wonderful. Everybody feels great. It's a fantastically fun session. And then they walk out, and then life gets busy. The leaders keep doing exactly what the leaders always did. They keep doing exactly what they always did. Okay, so workshops, great. If they're part of a plan, okay? They can't just be like, yeah, can you come and talk to our people about how crap their culture is? All right, it doesn't work like that. And the same goes for what I call words on a wall, all right? We do a big workshop, we decide on our behaviors and our below the line behaviors and all of this stuff and how we're going to treat each other and what vision and mission we all believe in. We put them on a wall, we put them at reception, and that's the end of that. Okay, words on a wall mean nothing if they're not part of something. If people can rattle off your values when asked, you're doing okay. But if I ask anybody, and I do regularly when I do culture audits for people, I go in and one of the first things I do is pick a random receptionist and ask them what their values are. And they stumble and stutter and sometimes manage to pull out a bunch of generic, you know, guesses. You know, professionalism's probably on there. Teamwork might be, respect, you know, you can often guess, but they don't know, which means it's not a valuable part of your cultural ambitions. So the flip side of that, what should you absolutely spend your time and money on, kind of no matter what, all right? Irrespective of how you do it, how much you can do it, these are the things pour your heart and soul into. Leadership, not just sort of my leader's been on a 3-day course and therefore they're a leader, has to be an ongoing thing. Check in with them. Are they having regular leadership mentoring sessions? Who is their leadership mentor? How is that happening? Is it actually been treated seriously, or are they just having a chat about operational things each month rather than actually going, how are you doing? What are you struggling with? What feedback have we got about something that's going wrong or people have a different perception of you? All right. Emotional intelligence for leaders as well as your team. If you can invest money in only one thing, chuck it here. Okay. EQ is the single biggest predictor of workplace success in almost any industry, and ours, you can imagine, even more so than most for many, many reasons. But never stop throwing more money here, okay, in every way you can. Workshops and, training and free stuff and, your employee engagement programs, everything should be coming back to conversations about EQ. Connections. Remember, we talked about 3.1 to 1 positive experience to negative. This one works in your favor. Put your money into allowing people to have friends in the workplace, okay, because that positive association, we all know about dog training, the positive association with a thing makes you associate that thing with positivity, okay? So they want to have fun. They want to know that people care about them as a people. They want to have experiences that make them feel warm. And when they do have those experiences, because our industry lends itself to a few of those, we debrief on them. We make a thing of those. We talk about those. We make sure they fully understand how good those things are. And they need to have one-on-one personal rapport with a manager. That means, yes, if you are a leader, please do put the time and money and effort, probably not money, time and effort into finding out what are your staff's children's names? What are their pets' names? Who is their partner? What are they studying at the moment? What are they worried about at the moment? Who do they want to be? You want to make sure that every time you have an interaction with one of your staff, there is something that makes them feel like you know them as a human being. Psychological safety. Okay, there's 2 major components to this. They need to feel safe to challenge you without their job being at risk. Okay, that's the kind of overarching part of psychological safety that most people talk about, is can they disagree constructively and that be okay? But the other part of that is strongly how you allow them to be treated by other people. So if there is bullying, if there is not even bullying, but just, snappiness and snarkiness and nastiness and that sort of stuff, if there is gossip, they're not psychologically safe. We're not doing our due diligence to make sure that we protect people from that. If we think how any of us would feel if our teenage girls were left alone in that environment and the school did nothing about it, we know we'd have an opinion on that. We have that same responsibility. Okay, so 0 tolerance for poor behaviors and how people treat each other being one of the most important tenets of whether they're a fit for your organization, and how we handle mistakes. Okay, because mistakes happen and they happen. I have been in charge of an organization when an animal died because a nurse gave the wrong fluids. Okay, they gave potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride, and the dog very quickly arrested. And there were a lot of people who were calling for her head, obviously the owners of the dog included. And it's awful. It's awful, absolutely horrifically awful for everybody. But the second she worked out what she'd done, as soon as the dog arrested, she started tick, 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 thinking, and she went and checked the rubbish bin and she checked the vial that she had drawn up. And she realized what she'd done, and she came straight to her leader and she told them immediately so that they could try their best to do the right interventions for what was happening. And then we did a lot of work with her on, okay, what happened? How do we build a system so that this can't happen again? Why did this happen? Now, a lot of people wanted her to be punished, okay, because that feels like justice. But A, as we all know, what we were able to do to make her feel worse about what had happened didn't really exist. And B, what we want in a culture is where people feel safe to go, I screwed up, help. Can that be okay? And their job not be at risk? Because most of our mistakes, there is not a life at risk. But what we want to make sure is that every time that there is a minor mistake, we treat that in a way that we show people how we want them to behave in a real mistake. Because if they are too scared to tell us because the last person who made a mistake got fired or got, humiliated, that's where it really matters. Okay, so that's psychological safety. And lastly, this is a big part of the alignment piece where you definitely want to invest is your mission, your vision, your values. Do you know why you're here? Does everybody know why you're here? There's an old cliche about, the tour around the NASA station and, the president asked one of the cleaners, what do you do here? And he says, I help put men on the moon. It's about, do people know what their role does to contribute to that mission and vision and values, and how are we recruiting for that? How are we hiring and firing for that? And making sure we align it at every performance review, every annual conversation, every regular monthly conversation, hopefully. All right, so I'm just going to do a quick pause there because we're about to move on to the slightly more nuancy, should you, shouldn't you, depends on how well you can do it stuff. But we're about halfway through, so I just want to do a quick pause in case anybody does have any questions they want to check in the chat before I move on to the more iffy stuff. I've only got the chat up, so if there's Q&As, then I'm sure Nell will tell me. All right, moving on then. So the next couple of pages are a little bit wordy heavy, and I apologize for that. But basically, it's because I'm trying to break down for you. These things are worth investing in if we do them well. If we're going to do them in a way that we can't sustain them, I probably would just focus on this page here, do these 5 things incredibly well, and sit on it for a while. Because if you've got these things down, your foundations are good. Okay, if you can really honestly say that these are the things that your staff know and understand and buy into, and not just, you know, do we have mission, vision, and values and they're stuck on the wall, but do people buy into them and engage in them and believe in them, then you are sorted. Okay, but the stuff that takes us from foundations to flourishing, that's the next stuff. So the nuances. Okay, does pay make a difference? Such a big question, right? Okay, so the answer is no, right? If you pay $300,000 versus $100,000 for your senior roles, obviously, if you pay $80,000 versus $70,000, it does not have a significant impact on people's engagement and the culture of your organization. As you saw from my CV, I've worked at, you know, specialist veterinary hospitals where people are being paid in the very many multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I have worked in small charities where we are, you know, the sniff of an oily rag thing is real, okay? And the culture there, trust me, does not correlate with what you pay people. But there is a really clear nuance on that first, okay? And that nuance is if people's basic needs are met first, okay? People need to be able to live and feed their families and be able to feel safe and looked after before they can engage properly in creating thriving cultures, okay? Before they can engage emotionally in what you want them to engage in, they have to know that they can feed their families. So remuneration in terms of way up here, not that important. Remuneration in terms of paying a living wage, and, you know, some of ours are pretty close to the borderline, that is important. All right. Now, I know that a lot of you are government related and you are on bans and you are stuck where you are. Okay. And I understand that. But there are still things that we can do with a band that can really help us. So, firstly, your initiative and your remuneration tactics are likely to be successful if your bands are heavily weighted for behaviors as well as technical skills. Okay. So, people shouldn't get to move up bands just because they've been there the longest. If tenure overvalued to the organization is why you move up a band, that will frustrate people. Okay. Equally, if people get to the top and there's nowhere to go from there, that's pretty disengaging. So, and again, I know you're working within government bands that you can't touch, but we can internally have things that we run. Well, once you're on the top band, what are we doing to invest in you professionally? And that tends to look like professional development, mentoring, engagement, project ownership, those sorts of things. Okay. So making sure that people know that there is somewhere to go when they hit a top band. And again, throwing money at it's likely to be a wasted resource if it's not fair, if it's not equitable, and it's not transparent. Again, if you've got a banding system, it's pretty darn transparent, okay? But if you are in a small charity and you have a lot of control over what you're paying people, and that's done behind closed doors, and there are different levels of pay depending on how well that person advocates for themselves. So you then end up with this sort of skewed pay scheme of more assertive people, usually males, are paid more than our primary demographic, which is normally slightly awkward, conflict avoidant females. Then that's where you're going to run into a lot of trouble, because remuneration does upset people and it can be disengaging if it's not done well. Make sense? So done well, you don't even have to touch remuneration, but there are some things that you probably want to tidy up because they can be bad for your culture if you're doing them badly. Yes? Okay, well-being initiatives. Good or bad, depends on whether you bother to do them well, all right? If you can't do them well and strategically and properly, I wouldn't put heaps of money down this sinkhole, all right? So if you are doing well-being initiatives and that you're talking about, you know, boundaries, and you're talking about how people need to take their lunch breaks, but you're not doing it as the leader, and you don't have systems and policies and processes in place that allow them to hold that boundary without having to get into a conflict with somebody else, then you're not really doing well-being. Okay, if people have to fight for their lunch break against a system, or if they have to have the courage to go and ask someone to change the schedule to get them a lunch break back, or if they have to assertively say no to a request from someone else in order to take their lunch break or to go home on time, then you're not taking it very seriously. So you want to have systems, processes, policies, which is, okay, that emergency came in at 5 minutes to your lunch break. We know that you couldn't stop. That's fine. I blocked you out some time later on in the day. The other big thing, if you, as a manager, I'm sorry, but if you are not taking your well-being seriously, A, you're going to burn out. Okay, can't pour from an empty cup and all of those sort of things. But B, this is where everything you do is in a fishbowl. Everything you do is magnified. And if they think that you do not genuinely take well-being seriously because you don't do it to yourself, then they're just going to think that it's words on a wall. Okay. So structures and systems in place, genuine commitment, role modeled, and across the board. Okay, lots of different things in place. If what you have is a poster on the back of your toilet door about your employee assistance program, that's a well-being initiative that probably you kind of have to do these days, because if you don't, you might be considered negligent in our industry. But it's not where I'd be throwing any luxury money. Yeah. All right, reward and recognition. I love this one. Reward and recognition is one of my favorites, because this is where people think that they should chuck their money. And this is where staff think that we should chuck our money. But actually, it's so much easier than that. It's so much simpler than that. All right. And so if people are coming and saying that they want Bagel Tuesdays, or they want, you know, to get $1,000 gift voucher, or they want employee of the month, all right, it's actually nowhere near that complicated. In fact, employee of the month is the most weirdly wasted effort that I ever see most organizations do. Okay, so reward and recognition. What doesn't work? Things that people expect all of the time. Okay, so a common example is bonuses. Clearly, that a lot of the time in our industry that doesn't work, but I also work with vet clinics where, like, they just get a Christmas bonus and everybody expects it, and that's normal. And then, God forbid, one year you're doing poorly and the bonus doesn't come, then people are disengaged, because something that was supposed to be a treat has now become an expected part of their remuneration package. Okay, so probably not a lot of us are paying bonuses, but really good examples of similar things are an Easter egg at Easter. Okay, I worked in an organization quite recently where somebody was like, okay, can you approve the budget to buy everyone an Easter egg at Easter? And I'm like, I have no problem with approving that budget in theory, but do they always get an Easter egg? Oh, yes, they'll be absolutely pissed if they don't get an Easter egg. Which immediately made me go, okay, we're not doing Easter eggs then. All right. And oh boy, this middle manager was horrified that I would suggest we couldn't do it. But the problem is, if we've got to the point where something that was supposed to bring joy, that was supposed to spark, oh, this is lovely, and oh, what a nice surprise, now brings a, oh yeah, we got our Easter egg. But if you don't do it, it brings disgust, then you've set yourself up to fail. So what I did is like, no, we're not paying for Easter eggs, but how much did we usually spend on Easter egg? A couple $100. Okay, let's get a chocolate fountain that day, on Easter in the tea room. All right. And it's about going, all right, we want to give people something, but we want to make sure that we keep it fresh and that we keep it in a way that people don't, there's something called the hedonic treadmill, which is basically about us, whatever state we're at, we just adapt to that. And so something that used to bring us a lot of joy just becomes a normal expectation for life. And so what we want is to avoid the hedonic drift. All right. So unpredictable, unexpected. All right. Christmas bonus, maybe 1 year. Sure. That might look to you guys like you have a sponsor who gives everybody a movie ticket. And then another year it might look like, you shout them all a Christmas lunch and everybody does a potluck and brings it all in. All right. It's about making sure that you don't let yourself fall into the trap of expectation, because then it's not reward and recognition. Is it aligned to values? All right. Some of that's pretty obvious, but I'm pretty sure you know what I mean. Okay. I would love you to consider personalized rewards, all right? Rather than a $50 gift voucher for somebody doing something, that aligned with our values and they met the criteria for teamwork or professionalism this month, so I'm going to give them $50 at Coles. What else could you spend $50 on them that says to them, I know you, I get you? I recently bought somebody pink tickets because I had $200 budget for my monthly, give somebody something for doing something nice. And Pink's coming to town. I know that they're obsessed with her. So I got them pink tickets. Because what that says is, this is for you. This is for what you did for me. All right. Personal. Think about it. And this is where putting the money and time into actually remembering something about them matters. Okay. I'm not kidding to you. I have a to-do list notebook on my phone, which every single staff member I work with long-term has a little file. And under there is things like dog's name is Harry, loves pink, really interested in art, mum's in hospital. So that whenever I'm like, oh, that person, I need to come back and get her something, I can go to that list and I can remember something meaningful about them. All right. Reward and recognition is also best done if run by the team, not you. Give them a budget, give them a scope, give them, here's the parameters I need you to work within, do whatever you want. They will do it better than you will. Okay. Well, they will engage more in it. And therefore, things that people engage in are always going to be better than your perfect program that nobody cares about. Yeah. Okay. There's one more slide of this because I know you're getting sick of hearing me talk. So these are the last sort of things. All right. Nuances. Team meetings. Do team meetings good or bad for culture? If they're done well, they're wonderful for culture. If they're done poorly, everybody hates you and hates them. Okay. So team meetings will be successful if you stick to time, you have a clear structured agenda, and the only things in a meeting are things that couldn't have been an email, which means they're conversations. If you are talking in your meeting more than everybody else, then you're just talking at them and you should have sent it in an email. Okay, so meetings should be about things that need to be discussed, that need to be collaborated on. Okay, clear agenda, stick to time, ideally get them to collaborate on the agenda, put items into it, and even better yet, share around who chairs the meeting each month. Okay, particularly if you've got a middle management team, start to get them to do it. It's their job to collate the agenda, it's their job to chair the meeting, it's their job to write up the notes, those sorts of things. Okay. Yeah. All right. Team building days. Again, I'm using irony given that this is what I do. Okay. Are they useful? If done well, if we have a plan, if we know what outcomes we're trying to get out of it, what are our priorities, what's going on at the moment, and we find a way to align those outcomes with some fun. Okay. Too much fun. People feel that was great, but we kind of wasted our time. We could have saved lives. Not enough fun. people are a bit overwhelmed by that. But most importantly is there has to be outcomes. There has to be tangible actions that get done and that get talked about and get refreshed and that we follow up, okay? Because people know how much these things cost an organization. And so if they sat in a room and they had a bunch of fun and they talked about a bunch of stuff and we put post-it notes on a wall and we did all of these things and then they never hear anything about it again, they know that that money could have been spent on saving more lives or doing more. All right. So make sure that it has a point. All right. And that you are going to bring lots of conversations in the next 3 to 6 months back to that day you had and why you had it. Consider family involvement. Again, you're trying to create positive emotional associations with your workplace. If you can have a team building day followed by a family fun evening or something to that effect where people get to know each other's people, you get to piggyback off the warm emotional feelings they get with their family and apply them into your workplace. All right. Last but not least, don't forget that if you're an extrovert and you design a team building day for extroverts, you will have a bunch of people in your room who hate you for it. All right. And last but not least, collaboration, consultation. Okay. One of the things that gets thrown around all of the time is, oh, we should have more collaborative decision making. And, oh, you know, people shouldn't just be told what to do. They should be asked and all of that sort of stuff. Great. Agree with all of that. All good in principle. But if you're anything like me, you've gone into an organization and you've gone, oh, I want all of your opinions and I want to know, and I want you guys to take charge of, you know, sorting out my reward and recognition program. And I want you guys to tell me how you want to be communicated with. And here's a working group for this thing. And they've gone, A, where do we have time for that? A, B, I don't know how to do any of those things that you just talked about. C, isn't that your job? Are you just trying to be lazy and get me to do your job? So, yes, you want people to have control of their destiny. You want them to get to decide how things work for the things that are important to them, right? But you need to, you can't start there. Okay. When I worked at Taronga Zoo, we had every single person, whether they were animal assistant, veterinary nurse, veterinarian, senior veterinarian, there was nobody that just was clinical. Every single person had very specific projects or ownership or things that they were in charge of, whether that was, I'm in charge of teaching all the keepers how to hand rear possums, to I am in charge of, you know, everything to do with our biosecurity, to I am in charge of everything to do with this working group for koalas. Everybody knew that their role was to be involved in making this place better. However, if you try to start there with a organization who's historically just been told, here's what you do, here's the policy, follow it, you will get a mess. And again, I've made this mistake quite a few times. They need to have a scope. They need to have, if they're new to it, a leader or somebody experienced in the group with them. They need to have check-ins. And, you know, it needs to be a part of a program where you are upskilling them to get better at this, not just a, oh yeah, let's tick some boxes of getting people to collaborate by having a working group. And most importantly, with collaboration, this is my number one beef about collaborating. You must make sure that you and them understand the difference between consultation, collaboration, and feedback. Okay, because the most common thing to disengage people about feeling like they get a say is that, you know, you draft a document, you send it to them for the feedback, they come back going, no, I don't like this because of this, and you should change this. And you go, oh, yeah, okay, I thought about what you said, but I didn't do that because of these reasons. And now they think that you were never going to listen to them in the first place and that you never really cared and that, you know, you just pretend to be collaborative. Because what you were looking for was feedback. You were looking for, tell me if there's major dramas. Otherwise, we're all going with this, all right? And what they thought they were doing was being collaboratively, you know, involved in a decision. So do you know the difference between when you're looking for collaboration, we together will design something and my say has no more sway than yours? Consultation, which is I've got some ideas, I'm going to put 3 or 4 options in front of you. I would like your feedback and options, and we can build something together, but ultimately I will make the choice. Or are you looking to feedback, which is, I think this is what we're going to do, guys. Can you point out any obvious troubles with that? Because the most disengaging thing for people is if they think they're being involved and actually they then just feel like, oh, you weren't really listening. You were never going to listen. Because the next time when you're trying to listen, they don't believe you. Cool. So that is the 45-minute version of 6 months worth of cultural transformation. Here's the things that I encourage you to invest in. Here's the things that I encourage you to invest in if you can do them well. Otherwise, stick to your foundations for now. Okay. I do just want to say, if anybody does need any more help, Nell and I have chatted about the fact that, I'm more than happy to support AIM members and G to Z members if you need help with your culture, with your people's resilience, that sort of stuff. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to offer a 10% discount on any of my programs. I do have a program that I'm about to launch, which is kind of designed for vet clinics, but is equally relevant to anyone in the animal industry, which is a kind of 4-month mastermind program where you go through in a group and we get the foundations set, and then we decide what's right for your clinic and apply those things. So that could be one to consider, but for a lot of people, they just find it easier to say, Jess, this is what I need, build it for me, and we can do that too. So that's, what do you call it? Hashtag? No, scanner, QR code, that's the word. That will take you to a link to my website. So if you want to scan that while I'm on this page, that will get you to somewhere where you can get in touch with me. Otherwise, obviously through Nell, you're very welcome to. Questions? Threw a lot of info at you there.
Thank you, Jess. I can't believe how many nails you've hit on the head in that short space of 45 minutes. I'm
It's
sitting
like
here
I've been there, eh?
it's just like you've been there. I was giggling to myself. I was, punching the air. I was, yep, been there, done that. So, yeah, amazing. I mean, you really do know your stuff, and to be able to boil it all down into those key messages, which are so, so important, was fantastic. We've got a question from Kay. Can you explain zero tolerance for bad behaviour?
Yes, I definitely can. So poor behaviors, I don't know if you've heard of below the line behaviors, but it's a really commonly sort of touted way of deciding whether people are treating each other in a way that you want to be treated. All right. Are they being constructive? Are they being thoughtful and considerate of other people's experience of the workplace? Now, what we tend to have, if any of you, I don't want to stereotype, I'm sorry, but it does happen. If any of you have older vets in your organization, there's this tiny little stereotype of them, for example, having that's just my personality. Don't take it personally. It's just who I am. I don't mean it. Okay. There are, of course, other people in your organization who may behave similarly, but it's just a funny little stereotype. When people are treating each other poorly, and that means, the little things like just underhanded kind of comments, bitching behind their back, or the overt things like, just, can't get any good help around here, the really genuinely poor behaviors. If that is noted and seen by leadership and nothing is done about it, your culture will rapidly spiral. So what I tend to do in an organization where this is one of the troubles that they're having is we do run a workshop on, for example, below the line behaviors is a good model, but it's not the only model, where we kind of go, okay, well, how do we want to treat each other? How do we want to be treated? What do we agree is a good way to behave between each other, so that it's not just coming from the manager saying, you shall do this because that's how I was raised. They decide. All right. And then at the end of that workshop, we decide, okay, now what happens if someone doesn't do that? How do you want that to be dealt with? Including if it's you. Okay. Because this is the point. They sit in a room and they want you to change everyone else's behavior, but not their behavior. Okay. So what we do is we sit together and we go, all right, well, for example, we go, okay, the first time you did it, someone's just going to go, hey, dude, out of line. What was that? The second time you do it, somebody might say, are you okay? This behavior is a little out of line. You know, is there something that we need to look at or change? The third time you do it, you're in your manager's office having a genuine conversation about what are we doing about this behavior. And the fourth time you do it, you know, you're getting formally written up or performance managed or whatever that looks like. Because if anyone is allowed to do that 4 times unchecked, unmentioned, then psychological safety is out the window. Okay. People don't believe that they can trust that if I ask you that question, I'm not going to get snapped at, or what are they looking at? Yeah. So yeah, exactly, Kate. Forewarning you that this is just who I am. Surely that makes it all right? It's absolute. Okay. People cannot use their personality as an excuse to treat other people badly. All right. So
Or
that
as
is
a
where
weapon.
emotional intelligence comes in, the ability to self-reflect. But even when you've got those people who are not especially self-reflective and not especially high on the EQ spectrum, that's why we sit them in a room together. We agree how we're going to treat each other. And if you don't treat me like that, here's what's going to happen. And then you follow through. Okay,
Yeah,
see you later, Rose.
absolutely. Bye, Rose. Thanks for being here. I've got a couple of questions. Well, actually, one comment, one question. So, obviously, a lot of the people here today run volunteer programs. And so, you know, as much as we want to make volunteers part of the team, you know, the work team, they are volunteers.
Mhm.
I have my own perspectives on what volunteers need in terms of recognition and all that kind of stuff. But what would you add to that? What would you say? How do we recognise volunteers in a meaningful way? Yeah, from your perspective.
Yeah, look, volunteers are they're such a wonderful asset and such a frustrating asset. All of the same theories apply in terms of the pillars and in terms of the levers to pull to get those pillars around, you know, safety and alignment and valued and empowered. All of that stuff is exactly the same. Okay. It's the things that we do specifically, the little interventions or the actual actions we take. And as well as anything else, I think with volunteers, it's around clear expectations at the beginning. Okay. Because this is where we get into trouble is the different, you know, my mum is your ultimate volunteer you would not want in your organization. She is amazingly, she's a workhorse. She will go in there and she will do anything you ask her to and well. But then she will demand that you make all of these things better and you do all of these things differently and you shouldn't have done that and you should do this better and you should put your money here and you should euthanize that dog and you should fire that staff member. Okay, we've all got those, right? My mum is one of them. And, you know, the ability to self-reflect doesn't exist. So what we need to do with those people is make sure we have things that they can feel empowered about. What is your scope of influence? How are you aligned? And what tools are we going to get you to make sure you can do those things? And we set those things out really clearly in a way that goes, okay, I love your skills. I love your enthusiasm and we need you. Here is how I want to put that to work. Now stay in your box.
Yeah,
And so it's about having that same psychological safety that they can come to you with feedback. They can come to you with, hey, I think you should fire that staff member. I think you should save that cat, whatever it is. And you have safe ways of going, I really appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much for that. Here's the formal steps you can take if you would like to lodge a suggestion. And here's how I will feed back to you why I made the decision that I did make. And that's the end of it. Okay,
yeah.
so it really is the levers and the pillars are the exact same, but with volunteers, it's really about having the boundary of what is your scope of influence, what is your scope of empowerment.
Yeah.
And we start with that at the beginning. And if it doesn't exist yet, then, you know, again, I can help with this stuff, but we design it and we design it on purpose with proper structure and strategy in place, not just, oh, we had one workshop once. Or we let them run their own culture because we know what happens when people run their own culture.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And I guess one comment I wanted to make about, I guess it specifically refers to more not-for-profits who perhaps aren't able to pay as well as they would like to, but may have their own vet clinic or have a really good relationship with a local vet clinic. One of the things we know, all of the staff have pets, and it can be a very valuable way to show appreciation and to perhaps bump up a lacking paycheck, is to provide discounts for vet care, because
Yeah.
that means a huge amount to people who, that their pets are a huge part of their life. So, in acknowledging what they're interested in, who they are, all that sort of thing, and then able to provide support in that area, I think is something that can be done, like I said, probably more from a not-for-profit perspective, but something to think about as well, I think.
And the really great thing about that now is, you could in some industries put that in well, that's a perk,
Yep.
yeah, sure, maybe that's a thing. But in our industry, I would go
Yeah,
so far as to say that in terms of meeting Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
exactly.
people who work for
Exactly.
us need to know that we're taking care of their animals too, and
That's
that
right.
they take care of their animals. So if
That
they're
they
off busy
can. Yeah.
struggling because their dog's broken its leg or they've adopted
Yeah.
your Addisonian dog or whatever it
Yes.
is, and they don't know how they're, it's the same as, can I feed my children? If I can't work
Yeah.
out how I'm going to get a roof over our head, I am
Yeah.
not engaged fully in your culture. The same
No.
is true for their pets, and most people that work for us, that is going to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, everybody is starting to head off to other meetings. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for being here. It is 1:05 already. I can't believe it. Thank you so much again, Jess. I know
My
I'm going to
pleasure.
have more calls to have you back again, but we really enjoy your sessions. The way that you can present things really easily for us to digest, break down quite complex topics. Humans are tricky.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So we do appreciate you helping us out, and your generosity with your time is amazing, so we really do appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along today, and we will see you at the next one. Take care.
My pleasure. See you, everybody. Bye.
Bye bye.